What's up guys, and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Today I am showing you what went into the making of my latest song. This is Bad Robot, The Return, and I'm going to play the main section of the drop, build it up piece by piece, and then go into some of the layering, the sound design, mixing, mastering, and all of that, and then go into a couple of the other sections. So let's kick it off with the main part of the drop.
Sequels.
And then I've got a bunch of assorted little bass stabs and whatnot, and I'll go into all of those in a second. But first of all, let's talk about the drums. So I've got a kick here, snare, see if I've got any processing on that. Just a little bit. Nothing too crazy. Removing a bit of bass from the snare. Then the big thing that brings it to life is this loop. Actually, this is a Virtual Riot loop. Just solo that here. So that big cymbal hits right when the snare hits. Adds a lot more upper mids, a lot more impact, which is a good time. Then finally with my hi-hats. And that's the drums, basically for the entirety of the song. Although if I hop over here real quick into the kind of rhythm section, I finally gave into the rhythm here. Find the other hi-hats. I have this cross stick sample. And then the cymbals modified a bit with some extra reverb. So that's this section. So that's basically it for the drums. Pretty straightforward, nothing too fancy here. So let's go into the big section, which is the bass. So let's start off with what is definitely the main hero of the song. The first thing I want to point out before I even get into the sound design is LFO tool. You can set this up to trigger with MIDI. So every time a kick and a snare hits, it ducks the audio a bit, and I like this over sidechain compression because of how much control it gives me. I can be really surgical with my ducking, and that's really nice. So I'm gonna actually get rid of this for a second so we can just hear the bass by itself. And here are the kind of the main things that give it its sound. First of all, the filter. Comb filter there, comes in a little bit, but the big thing is the FM. So I've got oscillator B here with a sawtooth wave with some sync on it, and that sync gradually increases over time. And let me get rid of the filter so you can just hear it by itself here. Get rid of the sub. I've got FM from B, that gets more extreme over time, and then the sync on oscillator B also gets more extreme over time, which is why the sound changes in the kind of crazy way that it does. You already get kind of crazy sounds from FMing from a sawtooth wave anyway, so when you have a sync sawtooth wave, you get that. Sounds kind of insane. So then we add a sub, octave lower, and our filter, and you have the basis for your sound. And let me get rid of all of these effects so you can hear what each of them do. So here's without any effects at all. Perfectly adequate bass, but I wanted to take it over the top. So I've got distortion, flanger. I should just loop this, shouldn't I? Dimension expander goes a long way into making that sound a lot better. Bit of phaser. Bit of delay. And that's your multi-brand compressor, basically OTT, and then another filter. That's not doing a whole lot, but it is there. So that's the main bass, and that definitely carries the drop. And then the other one is a slightly modified version of that. So that's this guy right here. Here I was much more restrained with sync, as you can see. And if you take it off, you end up with this. That wavetable, by the way, started out life as a hardstyle kick, which then I proceeded to mess up into oblivion. Let me get rid of that filter too. So with nothing, just the wavetable. Then with the filter. Then finally with the FM with the sync on oscillator B. And once again, all the exact same effects as the other one, because this is basically the same patch, just tweaked a bit. So you have some consistency and some variation. Kind of bounces back and forth. And then once again with this, I basically just tweaked the sync further. So it's versus. Tweak the sync a bit, get a bit of a different sound, keep your drop interesting, and then once again, I've got the exact same bit in the second half. So let's go into some of these little bass stabs here, because I've got a bunch of them, and a lot of these are, admittedly, presets, but I think this is fine just because you're dotting in all these little bits to keep the song interesting, these little fills, and the big important thing is whether or not they actually fit. So let me go from the beginning here. You can hear the difference that LFO tool makes. So let me just solo a bunch of stuff. So this saw-based bass here. This guy here. Actually, this is two basses. And you hear I've processed them all to sound like they all belong together. Some sample one-shots as well. And then also some fun kind of vocally stuff. And that is these right here. That ha and that scream also layered with the bass. So if I solo, if I hold. So moving on to kind of my B section of the drop here. And rhythm. So this main bass is a bunch of different elements all layered up. So let me go ahead and solo those. So first of all, this guy here. And this is that earlier bass except without FM and with a bit of filtering over here, as you can see. So that's kind of the body of the sound. Then on top of that, little extra attack. This guy here. And then finally, the one that's doing a lot of the work. And so when you layer these two together, they complement each other really nicely. I've got a bunch of the lows on the high one cut, and then a bunch of the highs on the low one cut, and so they kind of make space for each other. Then layer in the other two, and you get... So... you can hear one of my favorite tricks ever right here with the reverse element. Basically just soaked that bass and reverb, rendered it out, reversed it, and then added that little crossfade there. And this has become a very common thing in modern dubstep and rhythm and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people doing a lot of reverse reverbs. And this is also a very common effect on vocals. I'm sure you've heard me do it a million times if you're familiar with my music. And then also I have little moments of silence here, like when that huh comes in, everything else drops out, and so you get that nice contrast between these really loud sections and then little beats of silence to make everything really work. This one's kind of fun too. This is a couple of different elements. LFO tool. You can hear the reverb on that. This kind of whoosh thing. So that is the second part of the drop. Moving on to the breakdown over here. Pretty sure that's a Nexus patch. Yep. Sound effects. Add some atmosphere. What you know, it's pretty spooky. And then finally that big sub there. And that is this guy right here. And this is the same bass that you also hear in the intro. Add some consistency. And let me just pull up the Serum patch for this. Nothing too fancy there, basically just a pluck with a kind of out there wavetable and a bit of distortion. And as the title of this patch indicates, I took an AU5 growl, brought it into here as a wavetable, and then took that little piece and turned it into this nice pluck here. Which is the same one that you hear in the intro. Oh, and then finally this little offbeat pluck here. So real quick, the last thing I want to go into is the build. And for those of you wondering about the robot voice,
attention, my human creators.
I actually went over that in the making of video for the previous Bad Robot sound. So if you would like to see that, I will put a link down in the description with the timestamp already in there. So you just click it and it'll take you right to how I process the voice to get it to sound all robotic. And then a lot of the elements layered here in the intro are also the same as the original. Oh, I almost forgot to mention the mastering. The mastering is pretty simple. It is 2 plugins, OTT and Loud Max. I've got OTT just at a depth of 17%, only doing just a little bit of work, push everything over the top a bit, and then I've got Loud Max here doing quite a bit. And Loud Max is a completely free plugin that I've been using for a little while now. I really like it. It's available for both VST and AU and whatever else you can imagine. So, Loud Max, it's good. So, the final thing I want to talk about is the build, because I think a good build is really, really important to a drop actually having the impact that you want it to have. So the big key to making an effective build is to transition you from the breakdown to the drop and tease just enough of the drop to let you know it's coming, but hold back enough to where when the drop finally kicks in, it's really satisfying. So, let me show you how I accomplished that. So you got your horns. Subtle bass. Some filtering. And that's the same bass in this little section over here. You hear how these two basses interact with each other. Come on. So you can hear there, I teased that main drop bass, your main FM bass. But I have it pretty severely filtered down, both in the highs and in the lows. So you know what's coming, it almost has this siren-like effect, which I really like. And I've also added some reverb as well, just to push into the background. You've not heard the whole thing yet, but when it kicks in full force, you're like, oh, that's what I've been missing, and it's really satisfying. Then I've got the pluck bass. And I had this in there partially because you've already heard it in the intro, so I need to transition from what we're used to in the intro to what we're going to experience in the drop. And then also it drives everything forward really nicely, keeps everything nice and peppy. And since this is being ducked by the kick, it kind of disappears the faster the kick gets. It just goes away, basically. Then for that last little bit, it drops out entirely. Got our kick here. And I have filtered the kick both on the highs and on the lows as I go up before we drop. Once again, creating that space for the drop to really kick in and kick you in the teeth. And then finally, the classic riser that I use on pretty much every song, especially in the bass music world these days. Super useful, and actually if you would like to download this riser for yourself, I will leave a link in the description to do so. You can download that for free, no download gate or anything stupid like that. Alright, that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to see how I made the previous Bad Robot song, you can click or tap right over here. And if you would like to see another video, you can click or tap the icon right over here. Thank you so much for watching, and I will be back with a new video on Monday. Peace!